First off, I want to thank you all for the amazing support you've shown to the podcast. It truly means the world to me. If you haven't already, please subscribe to quick podcast summaries on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for only $1 per month. It will save you from spending 15 to 20 hours per week catching up. It's a great way to stay informed while saving time for less than the price of candy in most places. Here's a rundown on all the top secret information Trump is releasing and what he should declassify next, featuring Matt Taibbi by Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is discussing the recent Biden pardons, specifically the ones for Fauci and the J6 committee. Matt Taibbi thinks that Fauci's pardon might be related to perjury, as he's been accused of lying under oath to Congress about funding gain-of-function research. However, Matt Taibbi believes that the real issue is the larger context of gain-of-function research and the potential connections to the COVID-19 pandemic. Tucker Carlson points out that Fauci was part of the U.S. bioweapons program, and Matt Taibbi agrees that this is a significant aspect of the story. They discuss how the bioweapons program involves creating more dangerous viruses to develop vaccines, which raises concerns about the safety and ethics of such research. Matt Taibbi notes that the pardons are unusual, as they don't specify the names of the individuals being pardoned. He thinks that this might be a mistake, as it could make it easier for investigators to find out what's going on. Tucker Carlson agrees, saying that the pardons seem like a symbolic gesture aimed at MSNBC viewers to paint Trump as vindictive. Matt Taibbi mentions that he's spoken to criminal defense attorneys and former Senate investigators, who all think that the pardons are illogical. He believes that the only reason for these pardons is to cover up serious crimes. Tucker Carlson agrees, saying that the pardons have the appearance of moral incrimination. They discuss the J6 committee pardons, which Tucker Carlson finds particularly puzzling. Matt Taibbi thinks that the pardons might be aimed at protecting a few specific individuals, but the fact that they're not named is strange. Tucker Carlson senses panic among the permanent Washington establishment, particularly in the confirmation battles. Matt Taibbi thinks that the executive order on the weaponization of government could lead to a wide-ranging report into the misdeeds of the intelligence community. He compares it to the Church Committee hearings of the 1970s, which exposed many secrets about the government's activities. Tucker Carlson notes that the older generation of government officials often had a more cynical view of the government's activities. Matt Taibbi agrees, saying that people become more open to these explanations as they see more. They discuss how their generation was influenced by Schoolhouse Rock and All the President's Men, which they now see as propaganda. The conversation takes a creepy turn when Tucker Carlson talks about data brokers watching everything people do online and selling their information to governments and politicians. He started making a list of things he'd like to investigate, but couldn't finish it because there were so many different things. One of the big questions is who was president during the last 4 years, especially the last year. Matt thinks it's an enormous question and wonders who is actually running the White House. He wants to know the day-to-day operation of the Biden White House, especially in the last year, and who had the power of attorney to make big decisions. Matt also wonders who kicked Biden off the ticket and made Kamala Harris the nominee. He thinks it's a big question and wants to know what happened during that one-week period between mid-July and the 21st or 22nd. He's also curious about the process of the White House operation and who was actually making decisions. Matt thinks it's a coup if a sitting president is forced to drop out, and he wants to know who was behind it. Tucker Carlson agrees that it's a coup and thinks John Blinken's fingerprints are everywhere. Matt says that Blinken's State Department was also involved in censorship, and Tucker notes that Blinken accelerated the war between the U.S. and Russia in the last 2 months. Matt also wants to know more about the Biden administration's domestic policy, which he thinks is all about national security. He wonders who's making decisions on that front and thinks it's crazy that we've allowed so much to pass by without demanding answers. Matt recalls being in Russia in the late 90s and seeing intense reporting on quasi-coup, but notes that we got more information about those events than we did about what happened in the U.S. last year. Tucker Carlson is frustrated that there are almost no good reporters left, and the few good ones are attacked all the time. Matt agrees and notes that high-profile investigative reporters can't even publish in the U.S. anymore. He mentions Jeff Gerth, who wrote a 24,000-word piece about Russiagate that should have landed hard but was ignored. Matt also wants to investigate the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage, which he thinks is a huge story. He notes that there are 5 or 6 shifting official explanations of what happened, but he doesn't believe any of them. Matt thinks it's laughable to think that a rogue Ukrainian operation did it without us input. He also wants to know more about COVID, including what happened with gain-of-function research, and why Fauci's pardon is backdated to 2014. Tucker Carlson is fixated on the Nord Stream story and thinks it's crazy that the Biden administration would intentionally destroy Western Europe. Matt agrees that it's a big story, but notes that there are many other weird things that happened in the last 8 years, and Nord Stream is just one of them. He thinks that COVID is another area that needs to be reinvestigated, and that there are documents that exist that will tell a crazy story. There were questions about the advance notice lies told and the involvement of the CDC in the White House. The conversation also touched on the censorship issue and the efforts to control the public conversation about the pandemic. Tucker Carlson expressed his optimism about the investigations, saying that they would uncover something revelatory. However, he also wondered if the information would reach the public, given the intermediaries in the media. The conversation turned to the topic of the media landscape and how it has changed. Matt Taibbi mentioned that the old media is discredited and that the new media is thriving. F. Stone, who worked out of his house and put out a newsletter. Tucker Carlson shared a personal anecdote about how he used to trust institutions but no longer does. He said that the only way to regain trust is through transparency and honesty. Matt Taibbi agreed, saying that the people who have been administering the system and benefiting from it are freaked out and trying to stop the disclosure of information. The conversation also touched on the topic of the social effect of the disclosures. Matt Taibbi said that it would be like the church committee hearings, where people's minds would be blown by the discoveries and revelations. Tucker Carlson wondered if the people who have been exposed would become desperate and try to do something crazy to stop the disclosure. Matt Taibbi mentioned that the European Union has a massive infrastructure in place to control the flow of information, and that the US was close to being part of it. In a final aside, Tucker Carlson mentioned that he ignores all coverage that pertains to him in order to avoid becoming self-conscious. Matt Taibbi responded that it's easy to see things clearly when looking at someone else's life, but that it's hard to brood on it when it happens to oneself. Matt Taibbi finds it extraordinary that America would have had a different idea about lockdowns if they had understood how infectious the disease was and how unlikely it was to succeed in preventing people from getting infected. The suppression of this point of view is scary, and Matt didn't see the real research until a year and a half later. Tucker Carlson asks Matt if his wife, a doctor, knew about the COVID propaganda being fake. Matt replies that his wife and other doctors had to go looking for information, which was hard to find, even peer-reviewed research. This affected the whole question of experts talking to the press, and they weren't always informed about what was going on. Tucker wonders what the point of the COVID pandemic was, with everyone coordinated to increase fear, preserve lies about its origin, and hide information. Matt agrees it's a big question and hopes that documents will reveal the truth. He thinks there might be emails about how to get people to follow instructions and manage academic freedom, but the higher-level questions might not be answered. Matt moves on to discuss Russiagate, saying it's a big story and the easiest hit for investigators. He wants to know why the FBI opened an investigation into Trump and what evidence they had. Tucker agrees it's a huge story and compares it to Watergate. Matt mentions the hacking of the DNC and the emails released online, which led to the FBI investigation. He thinks it's strange that the FBI didn't investigate the physical removal of data from the servers and instead relied on a company called CrowdStrike. Tucker recalls a DNC staffer being killed in Washington, D.C. Matt thinks the whole situation is suspicious and doesn't make sense. Tucker asks Matt about the informants used in the investigation, and Matt replies that they know some of them, but not all. He thinks it's a huge story and a political espionage story. Matt also mentions the Steele dossier and how it was released, which he thinks will be looked into. Tucker shares his personal experience of having his text messages leaked to the New York Times, which he thinks was done under FISA. Matt agrees it's a big deal and that journalists have developed short memories during this time period. He thinks they need to get back into the business of telling people the whole story from the beginning. Matt discusses the pardon of Adam Schiff and how he's a central figure in both the JCC committee and the Russiagate story. He also talks about lawfare and the effort to make sure Biden faced no opposition in his re-election campaign. Matt thinks there was a coordinated campaign to prevent competition and wonders who made these decisions. Tucker asks who runs the Democratic Party, and Matt replies that it's a coalition of elected officials, big fundraisers, and others. He thinks the larger question is who managed the coordination of legal action committees, and if it had any connection to people in office. Tucker agrees that in a democracy, people have a right to know who's running the country. Matt Taibbi mentions that it was the first time a president had a sign on his desk that said the buck does not stop here, implying a lack of accountability. He also brings up the New Hampshire primary, where the results were canceled and a second nominating event was held months later, with officials allocating delegates themselves. This unusual event has never been fully explained. Taibbi also touches on the investigation into the Trump assassination incidents, which he believes was not thoroughly covered by the media. He finds it hard to believe that the FBI did not find any motive or evidence, despite conducting over 100 interviews. Tucker Carlson chimes in, pointing out that the alleged assassin was a typical American kid with no social media presence, which raises questions about how he was able to carry out the attack. The conversation then shifts to the topic of censorship, with Taibbi discussing the Twitter files, which revealed a big bureaucracy with government pressuring platforms like Twitter and Facebook to censor content. He mentions that there are already investigations underway, including one by the Senate's Government Oversight Committee, which aims to uncover the extent of government involvement in censorship. Tucker Carlson asks Taibbi to explain the Digital Services Act, which Taibbi describes as a wet dream for censors. Taibbi notes that this is a way for governments to regulate speech without directly doing it themselves. The conversation also touches on the U.S. government's control of Wikipedia, which Taibbi believes is a way to disappear inconvenient facts. He mentions that the former head of Wikipedia is now in a senior position at NPR, and that there is a need for clarity on what happened with the Real Clear Politics, polling average being left off Wikipedia's page. Tucker Carlson asks Taibbi about the future of the media, given the revelations about censorship and government control. Taibbi believes that the media will struggle to regain audience trust, and that simply changing direction or pandering to certain groups will not be enough. He notes that audiences are smarter than media people often give them credit for, and that they have a hunger for real information. The conversation then shifts to the topic of economics and foreign policy, with Tucker Carlson sharing his experience of being told that audiences are not interested in these topics. Taibbi agrees, noting that he has faced similar resistance when trying to pitch stories on these topics. However, he believes that there is a deep reservoir of interest among viewers and readers for these stories, and that the media's reluctance to cover them is often driven by a desire to avoid challenging the consensus. Taibbi notes that the media's failure to cover certain topics can have serious consequences, and that it is essential to challenge the status quo and provide accurate information to the public. Matt Taibbi brought up the fatwa and the Kenyan bombing, and Tucker Carlson agreed that there was a lot going on that was ignored by the media. Carlson wondered what would have happened if the media had done a better job of covering these events and asking basic questions. The conversation then turned to the topic of 9/11, with Carlson expressing his shock and confusion about how it happened. Matt Taibbi agreed that it was a pivotal moment in history, and that the media had failed to provide adequate coverage of the event. Carlson noted that he had been working in Washington, D.C. at the time, covering the news for CNN, and had been caught off guard by the attacks. The conversation then turned to the topic of corruption and the media's failure to cover it adequately. Matt Taibbi noted that the media had been overwhelmed by the constant stream of information and had become desensitized to it. He also noted that the audience had become receptive to alternative versions of the truth, and that it would take time for people to digest the information. Tucker Carlson asked Matt Taibbi about his reporting style, which is marked by its attention to detail. Matt Taibbi noted that he was obsessed with a particular detail from the previous year, when Joe Biden's campaign was lying about his poll numbers. The conversation then turned to the topic of party loyalty and the media's commitment to it. Matt Taibbi noted that he couldn't understand why media personalities would prioritize party loyalty over truth and accuracy. Tucker Carlson agreed, noting that it was a defining feature of modern life. Matt Taibbi noted that podcasting had created a space for people to explore different perspectives and ideas, and that it was a threat to the traditional media establishment. Tucker Carlson agreed, noting that podcasting had democratized the media and allowed for more diverse voices to be heard. The conversation turned to the topic of YouTube's suppression of the show. Matt Taibbi noted that it was shocking, but not surprising, given the current state of the media landscape. Tucker Carlson encouraged viewers to subscribe to the channel and share the video in order to get around YouTube's suppression. Thank you for tuning in. Just remember, subscription is only $1 per month. Leave a comment or a review. Your feedback helps us bring you the content you care about. Until next time, happy listening.